The morning sun streamed through the windows of Cafe Marina as Sarah Collins carefully balanced the ceramic cup in her weathered hands. Steam rose from the dark roast, mixing with the salty air that always seemed to find its way into the small coastal coffee shop. At 62, Sarah had perfected the art of the perfect pour, her movements precise and practiced after 20 years of serving coffee to the locals in this quiet seaside town. She had chosen this life deliberately. After retiring from her previous career, Sarah craved simplicity and anonymity. The cafe, with its mismatched furniture and faded maritime decorations, offered exactly what she needed, a place where she could disappear into the rhythm of ordinary days. Her customers knew her as the friendly barista who remembered their orders and asked about their families, but they knew nothing of her past. On this particular Tuesday morning, the usual crowd had gathered. Mrs. Peterson sat by the window reading her mystery novel, while Tom the fisherman nursed his black coffee and complained about the weather. The atmosphere was comfortable and predictable, exactly how Sarah preferred it. Everything changed when the door chime announced a new arrival. A distinguished man in his 70s entered, his bearing unmistakably military, despite his casual civilian clothes. His silver hair was neatly trimmed, and his sharp eyes surveyed the room with practiced efficiency. Sarah noticed the way he carried himself, shoulders back, purposeful stride, the kind of presence that commanded attention without demanding it. The stranger approached the counter, studying the menu board with the same intensity he might have once used to read tactical reports. Sarah smiled her practiced customer service smile and asked what she could get him. He ordered a simple black coffee, no sugar, no cream. As she turned to pour from the fresh pot, she felt his eyes studying her profile. "Navy?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Sarah's hand remained steady as she continued pouring, though her heart rate quickened. "I'm sorry?" she replied, not turning around. "Your posture, the way you move, you have military bearing, Navy, I'd guess." She faced him with the coffee, keeping her expression neutral. "That's quite an imagination you have there." But something in his weathered features seemed familiar, like a half-remembered dream that lingered at the edges of consciousness. The man accepted his coffee and found a table near the back, but Sarah could feel his occasional glances throughout the morning. When he left, he nodded politely and said nothing more, but Sarah knew this wouldn't be the end of it. He returned the next day and the day after that. Each time, he ordered the same black coffee and observed her with the patience of someone trained in reconnaissance. Sarah began to feel increasingly unsettled. She had built her new life on the foundation of obscurity, and this man's interest threatened to disturb the careful balance she had created. By the fourth day, other customers began to notice the stranger's regular presence. Tom the fisherman joked that Sarah had gained an admirer, while Mrs. Peterson speculated that he might be a widower looking for companionship. Sarah laughed off their comments, but privately, she wondered what this man really wanted. The breakthrough came on Friday morning when the stranger approached the counter and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "I think I know who you are," he said, his eyes meeting hers directly, "but I can't quite place it. Something about your hands when you pour coffee, the way you scan the room. It reminds me of someone I once knew." Sarah's blood ran cold. She had spent 2 decades building walls around her previous life, creating a persona so complete that sometimes she almost forgot who she had been before. But walls, she was learning, were not impenetrable. "I think you have me confused with someone else," she replied, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. The man studied her for a long moment, then pulled out his phone. Sarah watched in growing alarm as he scrolled through what appeared to be old photographs. His eyes widened slightly as he found what he was looking for. "Would you mind if I showed you something?" he asked, turning the phone toward her. Sarah found herself looking at a faded photograph of a group of naval officers standing on the deck of a ship. The image was decades old, but she recognized it immediately. Her breath caught as she spotted herself among the group, younger, wearing dress whites, standing proudly beside her colleagues. "That's the USS Constellation, 1987, the man said softly. "I was Admiral Harrison's aide at the time. You were Lieutenant Commander Collins, if I remember correctly. One of the finest sonar operators in the Pacific Fleet." The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too warm. Sarah's carefully constructed world began to tilt on its axis. She had known this day might come, but she had hoped it never would. "I'm sorry, but I really don't know what you're talking about," she managed. But even she could hear how unconvincing it sounded. The man nodded understandingly and pocketed his phone. "Of course. My mistake." But as he prepared to leave, he added, "Admiral Harrison is in town for the weekend. He's staying at the Harbor Inn. I think he'd be very interested to know that Lieutenant Commander Collins is alive and well." After he left, Sarah stood frozen behind the counter, her mind racing. Admiral Harrison, her former commanding officer, the man who had shaped her career and earned her deepest respect. If he was here, if he learned about her new identity, everything would change. She had thought she had buried her past completely, but the past, it seemed, had a way of finding you no matter how deep you tried to bury it. As she mechanically served the remaining customers that morning, Sarah knew that her quiet life in the cafe was about to become much more complicated. The stranger's words echoed in her mind. Lieutenant Commander Collins. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in 20 years. Now she had to decide whether to run again or face whatever consequences her discovery might bring. Saturday morning arrived with an unusual tension in the air. Sarah had barely slept, spending the night alternating between packing her few belongings and staring out her apartment window at the harbor lights. 20 years of peace were about to shatter, and she wasn't sure she had the strength to face what was coming. The cafe opened as usual at 7, but Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she started the coffee machines. Every time the door chime rang, her heart jumped, expecting to see either the stranger from yesterday or worse, Admiral Harrison himself. She tried to maintain her normal routine, greeting regular customers with forced cheerfulness, while her mind raced through possible escape routes. Mrs. Peterson noticed her distracted state immediately. "You seem troubled, dear," the elderly woman observed as Sarah nearly spilled coffee while serving her usual morning blend. "Everything all right?" "Just tired," Sarah replied, managing a weak smile. But nothing felt all right. The comfortable anonymity she had cherished was slipping away with each passing minute. At 10:30, the door opened and Admiral James Harrison walked in. Even at 75, he commanded attention. His silver hair was perfectly groomed, his civilian clothes pressed with military precision. Though he wore a simple polo shirt and khakis, there was no mistaking his bearing. He moved with the confidence of someone who had once controlled entire naval operations, his sharp blue eyes taking in every detail of the small cafe. Sarah froze, her back to the door as she arranged pastries in the display case. She recognized his footsteps, measured, purposeful, the same stride she remembered from the deck of the USS Constellation 3 decades ago. Her hands stilled on the glass case as memories flooded back unbidden. "Excuse me," came the familiar voice, deeper now with age but still carrying unmistakable authority. "Could I get a black coffee, please?" Sarah's world stopped spinning. She had dreamed of this voice in nightmares for years, not because it brought fear, but because it brought memories of a life she thought she had left behind forever. Slowly, she turned around. Admiral Harrison's eyes widened in recognition, but his expression remained carefully controlled. For a long moment, neither spoke. The cafe's ambient noise, the hum of conversation, the whisper of the espresso machine, the clink of dishes, seemed to fade into silence. "Lieutenant Commander Sarah Collins," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "After all these years." Sarah felt the weight of every customer's attention, though she suspected they couldn't hear the quiet exchange. Her mouth felt dry as desert sand. "Admiral Harrison," she managed, her voice catching slightly on his rank. "It's just James now," he replied gently. "I retired 15 years ago." She poured his coffee with hands that had steadied through force of will, the familiar ritual providing a moment of normalcy in the surreal situation. As she handed him the cup, their fingers briefly touched, and she saw something unexpected in his eyes. Not anger or disappointment, but relief. "I looked for you," he said quietly. "For years after you disappeared, I looked for you." "I didn't want to be found," Sarah replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I know." Harrison glanced around the busy cafe, then back to her. "Could we talk? Privately?" Sarah's instinct was to refuse, to maintain the wall she had built between her past and present. But looking into her former commanding officer's weathered face, she saw only concern, not condemnation. After a moment's hesitation, she nodded toward the small office behind the counter. "Give me 5 minutes to arrange coverage," she said. She quickly asked Jake, the part-time employee, to handle the counter, claiming she needed to discuss supplier issues with a vendor. Jake, barely out of college and more interested in his phone than cafe gossip, barely looked up as he took over her position. In the cramped office, surrounded by boxes of coffee beans and scheduling charts, Sarah faced the man who had once been the most important figure in her professional life. Harrison closed the door softly and turned to study her with the same intensity she remembered from briefing rooms decades ago. "You look well," he said finally. "Different, but well. The years have been kind to you." "Have they?" Sarah asked, settling into the desk chair while Harrison remained standing. "I'm not so sure about that. When you vanished from the base hospital, we thought—" Harrison paused, choosing his words carefully. "We thought the worst. Your injuries from the submarine incident were severe. The doctor said you might never fully recover. Then one day you were just gone. No forwarding address, no contact information. It was like you had never existed." Sarah's hand unconsciously moved to her left shoulder, where surgical scars remained hidden beneath her cafe uniform. The submarine accident had changed everything, not just her body, but her entire sense of who she was and what she could contribute. "I needed to disappear," she said quietly. "After what happened, I couldn't be Lieutenant Commander Collins anymore. That person was broken." "That person saved 17 lives," Harrison countered firmly. "Your quick thinking during the collision prevented a complete catastrophe. The Navy wanted to give you a commendation." "The Navy wanted to give a medal to someone who couldn't perform her duties anymore," Sarah replied bitterly. "I couldn't handle the pressure. The headaches, the memory issues, the panic attacks during sonar operations. I was a liability." Harrison moved closer, his expression softening with understanding. "You were wounded. That doesn't make you a failure." "It made me useless," Sarah said, surprised by the emotion in her voice. "I spent my entire adult life being the best sonar operator in the fleet. When I couldn't do that anymore, I didn't know who I was." The small office felt charged with unspoken history. Harrison studied her face, seeing past the 20 years of careful disguise to the officer he had once known and respected. "So you became Sarah the barista, instead of Sarah the naval officer," he said thoughtfully. "A complete reinvention." "It was the only way I could survive," she admitted. "Here, no one expects me to be anything more than someone who makes good coffee and remembers their orders. There's no pressure, no life or death decisions. It's simple." "And lonely?" Harrison asked perceptively. Sarah couldn't deny it. The isolation she had chosen as protection had also become a prison. She had friends but no real intimacy, respect, but no recognition for who she truly was. She had traded her authentic self for safety and peace. "Why were you looking for me?" she asked, deflecting from the uncomfortable truth. Harrison was quiet for a moment, seeming to wrestle with his own emotions. "Because I failed you," he said finally. "As your commanding officer, I should have done more to help you through your recovery. I should have fought harder to keep you in the service, found ways to accommodate your limitations. Instead, I let bureaucracy and regulations push out one of the finest officers I ever served with." "You couldn't have changed anything," Sarah protested. "Maybe not, but I could have tried harder. When you disappeared, I realized I had lost not just an exceptional officer, but someone I cared about deeply. Not romantically," he added quickly, seeing her expression, "but professionally and personally. You were like the daughter I never had." The words hit Sarah harder than she expected. She had spent so many years convinced that her disappearance had been barely noticed, that she was just another casualty forgotten by the system. Learning that someone had searched for her, had cared about her fate, opened wounds she thought had healed. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "for leaving without saying goodbye, for making you worry." "You don't need to apologize for surviving," Harrison replied gently. "But I need to tell you something. There's a reason I came looking for you now after all these years." Harrison's words hung in the air like a challenge, and Sarah felt her carefully constructed world shifting beneath her feet. Outside the office, she could hear the normal sounds of the cafe continuing, customers ordering, Jake fumbling with the espresso machine, the gentle hum of conversation. But inside this small space, time seemed suspended. "What reason?" Sarah asked, though part of her dreaded the answer. Harrison reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a thick manila envelope. 3 months ago, the Navy declassified some documents related to Operation Silent Waters. Do you remember that mission? Sarah's blood turned cold. Operation Silent Waters had been her last successful mission before the accident, a covert surveillance operation in the South China Sea that had provided crucial intelligence about foreign submarine movements. It had been highly classified, so sensitive that only a handful of people knew the complete details. "I remember," she said carefully. "Your work on that mission, the sonar readings you interpreted, the patterns you identified, it prevented what could have been a major international incident. The intelligence you gathered was used to redirect naval operations and avoid a confrontation that might have sparked a larger conflict." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "I was just doing my job." "You were doing much more than that," Harrison continued, opening the envelope. "The declassified reports show that your analysis was referenced in diplomatic negotiations, used by the State Department to strengthen our position in territorial water disputes. Your work had ramifications far beyond military operations." He pulled out several official-looking documents, their pages marked with formerly classified stamps that had been crossed out in red ink. Sarah recognized her own reports among the papers, her precise technical language describing sonar signatures and underwater acoustics. "The Navy wants to recognize your contributions officially," Harrison said. "There's going to be a ceremony at the Naval Academy next month honoring intelligence operations that shaped modern naval policy. Your name is on the list." Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. "No," she said immediately. "Absolutely not. I don't want any recognition. I don't want my name associated with any of this." "I told them you might say that," Harrison replied calmly. "That's why I came myself instead of sending official notification. I wanted to talk to you first, to explain why this matters." "It doesn't matter," Sarah insisted, standing up abruptly. "Not anymore. That life is over. I'm not Lieutenant Commander Collins. I'm Sarah the barista, and that's all I want to be." "But what if Lieutenant Commander Collins could help people again?" The question stopped Sarah's pacing. She turned to face Harrison, who was watching her with the same penetrating gaze she remembered from mission briefings. "What do you mean?" "The Navy is developing new sonar training programs," Harrison explained. They need someone with your experience and intuition to help design the curriculum. It would be civilian consulting work, no uniform, no military protocol, just your expertise applied to training the next generation of sonar operators. Sarah felt torn between temptation and terror. The idea of using her skills again was seductive, but it would mean acknowledging who she had been, accepting that her past was part of her whether she liked it or not. "I can't," she said finally. "My injuries, my limitations. I'm not the person I was." "Maybe you're not," Harrison agreed. "Maybe you're someone better. You've learned to adapt, to find peace, to build a life from nothing. Those are valuable skills, too." Before Sarah could respond, Jake knocked on the office door. "Hey, Sarah," he called through the wood. "We're getting pretty busy out here. Could you come help?" "Give me just a few more minutes," Sarah called back, but she could hear the stress in her own voice. Harrison noticed her agitation. "This is overwhelming," he said gently. "I didn't come here to pressure you. I came to let you know that you have choices." "Choices," Sarah repeated, as if the word was foreign. "You can stay Sarah the barista if that makes you happy. No one will force you to do anything else. But if some part of you misses being Lieutenant Commander Collins, if you want to use your gifts again, the opportunity exists." Sarah sank back into the desk chair, feeling the weight of 2 decades of hidden identity. She had convinced herself that she was content with her simple life, but Harrison's words were awakening something she thought had died in that submarine accident. "I need to get back to work," she said, but made no move toward the door. "Of course," Harrison said, standing to leave. "I'm staying at the Harbor Inn through tomorrow evening. If you want to talk more, call me." He placed a business card on the desk beside the manila envelope. As Harrison moved toward the door, Sarah found herself speaking. "Admiral," she said, using his rank automatically. He turned back, eyebrows raised. "Why did you really come looking for me?" Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his hand resting on the door handle. "Because exceptional people shouldn't disappear without a trace," he said finally. "The world needs what you have to offer, even if you don't believe that anymore." After he left, Sarah sat alone in the small office, staring at the envelope containing her past. Outside, she could hear Jake struggling with increasingly complex coffee orders, the sound of dishes clattering, customers growing impatient. Her simple world was calling her back to its familiar rhythms. But for the first time in 20 years, she was also hearing another call, the echo of her former self. The naval officer who had once been confident and capable and proud of her contributions. Sarah picked up the envelope and walked back into the cafe. The afternoon rush was in full swing, tourists mixing with locals, the space filled with animated conversation and the aromatic fog of freshly brewed coffee. She moved automatically to help Jake, falling back into the comfortable routine of taking orders and operating machinery. As she worked, she became aware that Admiral Harrison had taken a seat at the corner table, nursing his black coffee and reading what appeared to be a naval history magazine. He wasn't watching her directly, but his presence was unmistakable. The afternoon passed in a blur of cappuccinos and conversation. Regular customers chatted with Sarah as usual, but she found herself responding mechanically, her mind elsewhere. When 5 o'clock arrived and Jake left for his evening classes, the cafe emptied except for Harrison and an elderly couple sharing a piece of chocolate cake by the window. Sarah began her closing routine, wiping down tables and cleaning the espresso machine. Harrison remained at his corner table, patient and undemanding, simply present. Finally, as she flipped the sign to closed, he approached the counter. "Sarah," he said, and something in his tone made her look up sharply. "I know you think your career ended with that accident," he continued, "but I want you to know something. Do you remember your call sign?" Sarah's hands stilled on the dish rag she was holding. Of course she remembered her call sign. Every naval officer had one. a unique identifier used during operations. Hers had been assigned early in her career and had followed her through every mission. "Lighthouse," she said quietly. "Do you know why they gave you that call sign?" Sarah shook her head. She had always assumed it was random, the way most call signs were assigned. Harrison smiled, and for the first time since entering the cafe, he looked truly relaxed. "Because you guided people home safely," he said. "Every submarine that got lost in the dark, every ship that lost its bearings, they could count on your sonar readings to find their way back. You were the lighthouse that brought people home." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had never known the origin of her call sign, had never realized that it reflected how others saw her contributions. "You're still that person," Harrison continued gently. "Even here, in this cafe. You're guiding people, creating a safe harbor where they can start their days with warmth and kindness. You've been a lighthouse all along, Sarah. You just haven't recognized it." As Harrison left the cafe for the final time, Sarah stood frozen behind the counter, his words echoing in her mind. Lighthouse. The call sign that had once defined her professional identity suddenly took on new meaning. She looked around her cafe, at the worn wooden tables where lonely people found company, at the community bulletin board where neighbors shared news and offered help, at the warm space she had created for people to pause and connect in their busy lives. Maybe Harrison was right. Maybe she had been guiding people all along, just in a different way. That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment with the manila envelope unopened on her kitchen table. The business card lay beside it, Admiral Harrison's contact information a bridge between her past and her future. Outside her window, the lighthouse on the harbor point swept its beam across the dark water, guiding vessels safely home. For the first time in 20 years, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Lighthouse Collins began to consider that her story might not be over after all. The beam that had once guided submarines through dangerous waters could perhaps find a new purpose, a new way to bring people safely home. The call sign that had defined her past might also illuminate her future.